Today, we get to play with triple Strombergs. Yay. So this thing was running too rich enough that it, without the idle being too high, it would start loading up and decreasing in RPM until you cleared it out. So it needs leaned out a bit. And when the owner first bought this car, there was no oil at all in the carburetors. And these are a common issue for these to leak oil because there's an O-ring in here where the adjuster is. So we're going to go ahead and get the top of these carburetors, get them over on the workbench, and we'll show you the process of actually replacing the O-ring. So now that I got the dash pots off the carburetors, you'll notice this one here has the notch in it here. Neither of these two do. So these are actually a mismatched set of carburetors. This one here actually has the O-ring in the bottom of it with the adjustable needle. These two don't. But we're still going to go through the process of changing the O-ring in this for you over on the workbench. But before we go over to the workbench, let's talk about the difference between these carburetors and this one. I've looked up the numbers. There's numbers on the sides here. These two are S3225 front and rear carbs. Now it's hard to look up these numbers for GT6s, which is what this engine is from. There's not a lot of information, but these two are 1 year only carburetors. They only came on 69 GT6s, and these are non-adjustable needles and non-adjustable jets, where 67 and 68 had adjusters on the bottom to adjust the jets up and down. And then 70 and newer, which this is apparently, from what I can tell, a 71, this is an S3369 carburetor. Non-adjustable jet, but adjustable needle. Now, one thing I did notice once I got the air cleaners off and got in here, we got some yellowing in the frame rail down here. That is from this carburetor leaking out the side of the choke here, and it was actually dripping off the bottom here. And this one's just barely starting to leak. This one's dry. Now, I am not going to have enough of these gaskets to do 3 sets of carbs, so we won't be able to actually completely finish and tune these carbs in this video because I got to order gaskets. But we can do some of the basic work on it here. So just a quick lesson and why it's important to have the oil in the dash pots on both Strombergs and SUs is they don't have accelerator pumps, so they can't enrich in the mixture with an accelerator pump when you stand on the throttle. What they do have, though, is a damper rod. So when you stand on the throttle, the air coming through here is trying to push the piston up. But this damper rod here within the oil slows the piston speed so it doesn't just pop up and go lean. It holds it down temporarily, allowing the speed across the bridge of the air to raise, sucking more fuel in, and that's how you enrichen it. Without oil in these, depending on how the carbs are adjusted and how rich they are, you'll get anything from a stumble to it just coughing back through the carburetors because it just goes lean. So that's why it's important. And that's probably why this thing is running so rich, because the previous owner was trying to compensate for that by cranking everything as rich as he could make it go to get it to stop stumbling. Now, on to replacing the O-ring here. The reason why this has the notch in it is there's a special tool here that has a notch in it here that, with it all assembled, you can put this in here and hold on to that so you don't spin the piston within the carburetor, because you can tear this rubber diaphragm if you let it spin. So you can hold on to that while you turn the key here to adjust the needle up and down. Now, to replace the O-ring, the first thing I like to do is double check where we are on our settings by going full rich with it and counting how many turns it goes up till it bottoms out. And this one here is at full rich, which would support the idea that the previous owner, who wasn't actually a British car guy, probably didn't even know it needed oil and had everything and had these full rich, because these needles here look like they're pushed all the way down full rich as well. So that makes sense. So what we'll do is we'll turn this thing down as far as it'll go until it basically disconnects. The threads will disconnect, which that's more than enough. And then you take this set screw out, which has a little nub sticking out that rides in a slot here to keep this thing from spinning within the piston and just going up and down, because otherwise it would just spin and you'd never actually get adjustment. So then you find yourself, I like using these pin punches. It's a 5/16. It fits in here really nicely. And then you tap it down. I'm not going to do it on the workbench, it'll make too much noise. But you tap it. And yes, I keep my thumb over here for a reason, because I'm trying to catch this assembly here. That's your adjuster. So this is threaded. This is actually what's adjusting the needle, because this thread's in here. And as you turn the needle, that's adjusting the needle up and down. And then you got this spring clip in here that holds it in place. So since you have this thing in here, in order to hold the oil in place, you got an O-ring around the edge of this. And that's what keeps the oil from draining out. So if you keep losing oil and you have to top off your oil like every time you fill up with gas or every other time, then this O-ring has basically shrunk up, gone back, hardened, cracked, whatever. And sometimes these things don't want to move, and you really got to like soak them down and work them to get them to pop loose, because the O-ring can be stuck. But to replace the O-ring, basically you're just going to pull that thing, get in there, which this O-ring isn't that bad, but we're going to change it anyway. These carburetors were put on this car in 2018, so it's, what, 6 years old now, roughly. So we got a new O-ring, and you just put that on there. So you should put a little bit of oil on there just to make sure that it slides down in there nicely and we don't damage the O-ring. And we can set that in there. Now this clip, it kind of has a it's humped up in the middle, and then these go up a little bit. You can put it in either way. If you put it in the one way versus the other, makes a difference. You want it so that it'll be less likely to pull up out of there to where it's humped up in the middle and the knees are coming up like that. So you set that in there. Take your pin punch and just slide it down in there till it bottoms out. And then we can put our needle back in. Put the needle back in so that the slot is lined up with where the set screw goes. Get the set screw back in place. Where it's into the slot. And put some pressure on the needle so that it'll catch the threads. Now we caught the threads, it'll start coming down. Now, since this thing was running so rich before, we're going to start out with actually leaning this thing out by about 1 full turn as a starting point, and we'll go from there. Where it gets interesting though is, for what we're doing today, the non-adjustable ones. Technically there is adjustment. You just can't adjust them without taking the carbs apart and taking these out, because these will slide back and forth. By loosening the set screw, then you can move it slightly and then put the set screw back down. So what we're going to end up doing here is measuring, now that we've backed this off or screwed it down one full turn, is we'll measure it, which we can use something like a set of slide calipers and measure the distance here. And if you don't have slide calipers, but you do have something like these, which are a whole lot cheaper, you could use this and do exactly the same thing. Just make sure this is, sitting square on here. Get the needle square and push it down until it just touches. Get it, I'll be more exacting like this. I'll be more exacting for my actual measurement than what I'm doing here, but and then you come in here and do the same thing with this and raise this until it matches that. And then that's where we'll tighten the set screw. That way we have all the needles at the same place, and we can put them back into the car, start it up, bring it up to temperature, and then see where we're at and if we're lean enough. If we're not lean enough, then we adjust this a little leaner, take these back out and go through that measuring process one more time, and just keep doing that until the car is spot on where we want it. So the alternative to all that measuring and taking them apart and putting them back together is two options. One is they do make a adjustable jet kit to put into the 69 carburetors, and we could put those into those two carburetors, and that would allow us to adjust those jets and not screw around with trying to get perfect measurements on these. The other thing you can do, there's two ways of doing this, is one, you can actually convert these. There's information out there on the web to drill these out and be able to convert these to the adjustable needles and cut slots in them. But the other thing you can do is actually get pistons from the later carburetors that already have the slots and adjustable needles and use those instead, and then you can adjust them all with this tool. It really comes down to either spend the time tweaking it or the money up front swapping out all the parts.